evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy that you are here tonight for this first of three series held by the Churchill Society for the Advancement of Parliamentary Democracy. I'm especially grateful for the panel to have traveled from the distances they've undertaken, and I'm looking forward to a wonderful discussion led by Professor Alex Marland. The Churchill Society is a nonpartisan charity. It is interested in promoting and participating in public discourse and education relating to the well-being of our Canadian parliamentary democracies. Winston Churchill is our masthead as a paragon parliamentarian, student and master at the same time of a phenomenon of governance that grew out of civil war and conflicts over its character dating back to the 17th century. The results became ours in 1867 to be embraced for the benefit of all entitled to cast ballots, even if some don't, and for those who are aspiring voters. I'd like to now introduce the panel, first starting with Professor, I shall say Dr. Alex Marland, who is a professor at Acadia University. He is the author of an important book for this evening called Whipped, Parliamentary Democracy in Canada. He is lucky enough to be by the shores of mighty tides of the Bay of Fundy, which I'm sure inspires great wisdom on your part. But he's also an author of another book, which will become a prize for anybody that can answer Churchillian trivia. And that was perhaps a more important book because you won the Donner Prize for the best public policy work for 2016, I believe. And it was entitled Brand Command, Brand Command, Canadian Politics and Governments in the Age of Message Control. So we're very honored to have you here and delighted that you're leading, I'll call you the independents, because you are a rare breed and have something very important to contribute to the public discourse. I'm happy to introduce Bobbi Ann Brady, MPP, Haldimand-Norfolk, who is a historic independent because she chose to stand for election as an independent after having not been selected to run under the banner of the Conservative Party. And you know, I have to say that I'm not surprised that that happened in Haldimand-Norfolk because I happen to have a connection to Haldimand-Norfolk going back to the tempestuous days of labor relations in the late 70s here. And I had a lot of work to do there with the police, and I spent so much time there and enjoyed every minute of it because it's an independent place. It's got an independent mindset that I can recognize. So I guess maybe they recognized somebody in me because they admitted me to being, looking for my badge, an honorary member of the police force. And there I am, February of 1979, an honorary member of the Haldimand Police Force, or the Haldimand-Norfolk Police Force. So I've always carried the badge when I'm driving in that direction in case I get caught. Also, thank you for coming a long distance, Elizabeth Smith-McCrossin from Cumberland North, which is a further up the Fundy from where Professor Marland is. But you get to enjoy both sides of the tides, the mighty tide of the Fundy and the quiet tide of the Northumberland Strait. Elizabeth is an independent in her second round of election by choice. The first round was under the banner of the Conservatives, but Elizabeth will be saying more about this, I'm sure. She became an independent midterm, and I happily ran into her in her constituency office, and I've been following your career with great interest, and can realize by following you both the magnitude of what you can do when you don't have the whip and the control of the party. And finally, Stuart Scott Sims, who was MP of a beautiful constituency in Newfoundland, coast of bays, center, Notre. from 2004 to 2021. And while actively representing your constituents as MP, you found the time to contribute to a set of essays done by other sitting parliamentarians, which is entitled Turning Parliament Inside Out, Practical Ideas for Reforming Canada's Democracy. And you are here tonight, and thank you very much, because your essay zoned in on the pitiful plight of the backbenchers and offered good solutions that we can resurrect and talk about and perhaps form a plan this evening. So I wanted to just say that our society has fortunately attracted a lot of people who have been very interested in parliamentary democracy and also have made their profession examining it. And I want to dedicate tonight's session to Peter H. Russell, Professor Emeritus of Innis College, U of T, who has just passed. He's no longer with us. But it's important that this be dedicated to him because he wrote a book amongst the many that he wrote that's important to the discussion this evening, and that is Two Cheers for Minority Government. In that book, he was able to assemble data clearly to look at the changes, the circumstances of change that had happened in our parliamentary democracy, federal mostly, from Confederation until roughly 1968, at which point it became different because of the reconfiguration of power. So he ended up concluding rightly that minority government was the best government in the circumstances of these changes, which he had to accept as permanent. And of course, one of them is party discipline being much more tight, the congregation of power in ministerial hands, with the accompanying loss of cabinet and caucus participation in the formation of policy and legislative initiatives, the dilution of debate, the limiting of opposition through various techniques. So he was able to clearly see the changes that had taken place compared to the first 100 years of our Confederation, and then be able to see that minority government was the best form in order to counteract some of the ills that have resulted from that. So I think his contribution was to see that Parliament is a zero-sum game, so that when power is lost over here, power is gained over there, and that makes the analysis a lot better in terms of measurement. And currently, measurement is quite intense globally on gauging whether democracies are declining or not. And a group, VDEM out of Sweden, has developed, an enormous number of factors in order to be very precise in coming to conclusions that in past days, for example, Michael Bobbi, Toronto Star, he, in 2013 said Parliament is broken. But of course it was imprecise and it led to no interest or discussion, whereas the measurement now being more textured, we can actually identify where the puts and takes are, and that's the contribution of Professor Russell's book. So hopefully there will be 3 sessions, this being the first, that will assemble the kind of data that the people who practice complexity theory will be able to hone in a more accurate way in order to determine where we're at and maybe perhaps get the attention of parliamentarians and people who have great ideas about reform and change. So without further ado, I'll pass the microphone over to Professor Marland and begin your work.
Okay, I just want to situate things by helping everybody here realize how fortunate we are to be joined by our guests. So, if we were to think about all of the politicians who have ever been elected in Canada at the federal or provincial level since 1972, and the reason why I picked 1972 is that was the first election at the federal level that party labels appeared on the ballot. Up to that point, you had your occupation. So from that point forward, people could not know who their individual representative was as long as they knew who the party was. So since 1972, if you were to take all of those people who have been elected, including 3 of you, you would be able to fill a mid-sized hockey arena. That's, I've counted. All right, so why do I use that as context? So let's narrow it down a little bit. If you were to take all of the people who are elected as an independent, so I'm not talking about people who left a party and sat as an independent, I'm talking about people who actually ran as an independent. They might have been part of a party before, or not, but who actually got elected, and when people went to vote, it said independent candidate. They would fill a small van since 1972. To get even more precise than that, the people who ran for the first time and got elected as an independent, who were not previously elected as with a party, and who ran and got elected for the first time as an independent, could sit in the front seat of that van. You are one of 5 people who has done it since 1972, as far as I can tell. It's quite an accomplishment. And so the types of perspectives that we're going to get from the 3 of you all bring similar perspectives and yet different perspectives. So in Scott's case, as a very long-time federal member of Parliament with the Liberal Party of Canada, and yet at the same time, you know, you serve in opposition, but also you're in the governing party, but you're also not afraid to push back from time to time. I've just mentioned about Bobbi and your ability to get elected on your own name is an incredible accomplishment in its own right, and since then, you've very much carved a name for yourself as somebody who champions the issues that matter to your constituents. And Elizabeth has gone through a lot of challenges to get to the point where you are. And sometimes party politics can be rough and tumble. And yet you've persevered and you've managed to get elected on your own name as well. So you all bring perspectives about party politics in different ways. And so what we're going to do this evening is talk about some of these perspectives. And what I'm hoping you'll do is share some of your stories. And as you share some of your stories, collectively we can kind of learn from those stories. So I want to start out in a place where you might not think I would start out. And I would like you to help us understand, why are political parties necessary? When are political parties good? So we're going to start from a premise. We're not coming at this suggesting that political parties are evil, terrible things and we need to get rid of them. It's more that they exist, they're entrenched. What is good about political parties in your experience? So whoever wants to start first.
Maybe we'll let Scott start.
I thought you were coming to me for sure, because I never was an independent. I was independent-minded. For many reasons, I started out as a person who, I gravitated to the Liberal Party because of my values. And that was way back in 2004. So at that point, it was Paul Martin who was the leader. The big benefit, I think, at that time of the party is that the machinery that surrounds you is easily attainable once you win a nomination. So one thing you can say to everybody is that, you're an independent when you go after the nomination for a particular party to a certain degree. You're independent of yourself because of the resources that you have to come into yourself. You can't even use a party logo if you run a nomination. And it's harder to raise money for reasons obvious. Now, once you win the nomination, you get the party machinery such as the advertising. You still have to pay for it, but it's at a reduced rate because everything is printed and so on and so forth. You get the big discounts. You get the benefit of people who have won before. You also get the benefit of people who've lost before, which I think is probably a more important question nowadays, which is, if you want to win, learn from people who lost, because that's something that a lot of people don't realize. I'm sure you've experienced that in your own way. But that, to me, the machinery itself allows you to be more efficient, especially with things like a snap election, and you don't have a lot of experience running. I mean, there are a lot of things that people came up to me because they were longtime Liberals who told me, you should do this, you do that, don't go to that door, go to this door, don't go to that door. The reason why is because it's a no, you're wasting your time, go to this one. So there's a lot of field work that comes automatically with a nomination win. That, to me, is probably the biggest one. Now, if you're a person who toes the party line, your message also becomes very easy. You don't have to do a lot of homework. You just got to memorize lines. I say that facetiously, and I mean it facetiously. Because a lot of people who run, they do prepared texts by someone they've never met. They go through the issues based on lines from people who never voted, never lived, never set foot in your riding. And therefore, that's someone, even if I wanted to vote Liberal, I wouldn't vote for that person. But people do take advantage of that. And that, to me, those are the major benefits of being in a party.
Bobbi, you spend time in the legislature, you see political parties operating. What are some of the benefits of political parties in our system?
I think for the electorate, it's the clarity. So political parties, you gravitate toward a party that supports your ideals or where you best fit in. And so it creates a sense of clarity. And that messaging where, somebody is handing you messaging on a daily basis, that all creates clarity when you're all concise and you're all, singing from the same hymn book. So it should create clarity. We do see this the situation now where what happens when you stray from that clarity? So you have a party that runs on a platform and they stick to those. What happens when they stray from that platform? Then the clarity for the taxpayer becomes very, not so clear. It's murky. And I'll give the example. Last week we were talking about Service Ontario kiosks in Staples. Today we're talking about them in Walmart. That was not a campaign pledge. That was not something talked about. That was not clarified for the taxpayer when the Conservatives were elected. So, that's where it becomes a bit of a shady section for the taxpayer. So, the clarity is good, but when you stray from it, it's not so good for the taxpayer.
Yeah. I mean, my comments, in addition to there, I would just say, on the surface, parties could work, but when you get in the actual mechanics of what's happened inside of parties, they've lost sight of democracy. They've lost sight of why we're actually there to serve. And because of that, it's a little bit harder for me to share the positives because the experience has been so challenging. But the unification of shared values does help. But the negative of that is when you can be so easily branded. And, if there's 20 people that are a part of a party elected together, there's no way that they all share the exact same, and it's not fair to brand them all with that way. If parties truly functioned democratically, then I think they could be positive. But because there's so much work done that's not democratic, like the example of staff telling elected officials what they can or cannot say. Most people citizens would be appalled to learn that, right? They say, well, we didn't elect the staff, we elected you to be our voice. What do you mean they're telling you can't speak for us? Most people would be really shocked about the actual day-to-day workings within a party. So I think on the surface they can work, but they've just morphed into something that I think they were never meant to be.
Right. So maybe we can use that as a transition to talk about some of the troubling things about political parties. What are some things that maybe we're not aware of, or not, we kind of have a surface awareness of, but maybe you know more about that we should hear about? So what are some of the troubling aspects of political parties from your experience?
I think that the majority of people believe that their representative goes to Parliament and represents them, and they don't understand the branding. They don't understand how tight the messaging and the control is. They don't understand that in a caucus boardroom there are staffers who tell elected officials to sit down and keep their opinions to themselves. And you're exactly right. If the electorate knew that, if voters knew that their representative was being told to sit down in what I would classify as the change room, right? I'm a hockey player, and when you leave the ice, the door is closed, and you have that discussion with your team. That's how you get better. And that is no longer, that used to be the way caucus worked from what I'm told. I've never been in a caucus boardroom, but that's what I was told. I was a staffer for 23 years, and it worked that way, and it no longer works that way. I feel that these regimes, these parties are not interested in actually getting better. They don't want to listen to the grassroots. They don't want to listen to their members who are in the coffee shops and on the ground when they're not at Queen's Park, and it's a real detriment.
Yeah, I recall the very first time that it happened to me. I was the health critic, and we were in opposition. And I had done my first interview about this situation, and I've been a nurse for a long time, and so they had the journalist had asked me a question, and I gave an answer, and I said, and this is how we could have made an improvement. This is what. And right after the interview, I was hauled into the office by one of the staff and said, "So you can't ever do that again." I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "You're only allowed to criticize the government. You can never give a solution to what the problem is." And I said, "That's ridiculous. Like, that's not why I got elected, to just criticize the government. People expect more of their elected representatives, in my opinion." So that was the first experience, but that continued on and on, where I realized that, the phrase, the tail wagging the dog, that absolutely there is a lot of power with the staff, because elected MLAs or MPPs are giving them that power. So if you stand up and say, "No, people didn't elect you, they elected me," then that takes you down a troublesome road too, because you're not towing the line. You're not. Yeah.
Scott, we live in a world now where things are really fast. There's a lot of things going on. It's really important to have staff who can, be constantly looking on their phones and keeping elected officials kind of steering things and assisting them. There's a reason why there's so many of them, and yet the concerns that you've raised are actually fairly common from elected officials. What's your perspective about the role of political staff?
Well, I was caught up in the thing about before, but caucus and how more and more useless it's becoming over time. But when it comes to staff, if something we said earlier, which was about the fact that power, there's power in certain staff members, especially at the cabinet level, certainly at the leaders level or premier/prime minister level. I said in an interview one time with W5, we're doing a story about a constituent who was in trouble with CRA, and they were treating him poorly. And I said, if Canadians knew just how powerful non-elected people are, you'd be amazed. And that's a big part of it, because now it's caucus in many cases just becoming a perfunctory operation of a gabfest, where we all get together and try to be friends with each other. And we are friends, some not, but some pretend, but whatever. What's happened here is that, and this goes back to the 1980s, when polling started taking over. There was a time when caucus was, "Excuse me, leader," whatever party you're in, "this is what's happening in my corner of the world." In the 1980s, pollsters came along and made an incredible amount of money doing their job by telling the leaders, "He or she says that's not entirely true. These are the numbers." I heard a leader once say to a caucus, "Okay, I know we're here, we're talking about," it was a 3-hour caucus meeting. And it was like, "Okay, I know we're here, it's a very heated issue, but I'm telling you it's this. Remember, there are stories, but there's also data." I reminded the leader, "Excuse me, but behind every piece of data, there is a story. And we're not data people, otherwise we'd be useless. There'd be no such thing as local representation. Why would you? If you only rely on the data, why would you need us? But the story needs to be told because policies are complex, and people who are affected by policies are complex issues. Mm-hmm. This is where staff can help. Staff can build into your knowledge base to bring it to the top, whoever's elected or not elected, right? And if you're using staff only to push the message out to your own constituents, they're not being used in the right way. Remember, leaders would love to have every member of their caucus to be messengers. What a fabulous world that would be. But you're doing a total disservice to yourself and to the country, not only the short term, but the long term as well. because now you've got it wrong, and you've got to reverse engineer a bad decision, because guess what? You didn't get what the middle class wanted in the case of middle class.
Scott, you were about to mention caucuses, and so I'm wondering if you can describe for us what it's like in the National Caucus, which meets Wednesdays in Ottawa. There's going to be over 100 MPs from across the country in that room, and then maybe afterwards you can kind of explain what it was like in Nova Scotia, because the caucus is not going to be, it's still going to be a big setting, but not quite as large as what happens in Ottawa. So I'd like to compare the two.
Well, caucus has a dynamic. Well, first of all, I was a Liberal, which means a Big Ten party. So you can imagine, I mean, I'm in a room where in 2004, their marriage only belongs to a heterosexual couple, compared to the next person where marriage should be open to anybody. This person believes that there should be zero spending on military defense. This person believes that we should up it by 25 to 50%, which is substantial. So this becomes a very interesting conversation. Caucus, if there's more of a conflict in caucus, it serves the country better, because you get what you talked about earlier, which is you get it done in that room. Because if it doesn't happen, because a lot of times we used to poke fun at people because they get up to the microphone and say wonderful things about how we're doing. That's a cabinet audition. I know that sounds poor, but that's exactly what it is. There are people who cabinet audition, there are people who talk to their issues, there are people who will defend their friends of theirs, because I mean, we get to be friends after a while too. Let's be honest, we're colleagues. And that's one of the reasons why it's hard to vote against the party. Everyone thinks it's not just about discipline. It's because you're getting the person sitting next to you, your friend, it gets them in trouble too. Anyway, caucus can be a fantastic dynamic, and it can also be useless. And it doesn't take much to go from one to the other.
A part of a caucus for 4 years, and there was some positives, there were some challenges. I think one of the dynamics of my personal experience is that I jumped into a leadership race 6 months after being elected in my first term, which was maybe kind of crazy looking back, but I have no regrets. But the dynamics that happen in a caucus during a leadership race can be very unhealthy, and that was certainly my experience. There's groups and bands and a real lack of trust and no teamwork or camaraderie. When it comes to making decisions, sometimes caucus can be really healthy. Nova Scotia is a small province. However, the needs of those living in Cape Breton are very different than those living in Cumberland County, very different from those living in Yarmouth. So, working as a team to make sure that all of the issues and concerns from all of us caucus members are being able to be brought to the legislature, whether it's in question period or in the form of bills and legislation, takes a lot of work and working together. And unfortunately, that always didn't happen. And one of the big reasons that led to my removal from the party was, the pandemic was a very challenging time for a lot of people. In Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, the borders were shut down, and there was very little movement allowed between the two provinces. And in our particular situation, we have a border town. You remember what Amherst is like, with Sackville and Moncton, and literally 50% of the people that worked at our hospital lived next door in New Brunswick, and 50% of the people on our side, worked in New Brunswick and vice versa. And there was about 17 months of just complete disruption. It's unbelievable the circumstances and situations that happened through that, and just the day-to-day stress and the decisions that were being made by government that never took into consideration the impact on the people that lived in my particular area, led eventually to the removal of me from the party. But leading up to that, I was telling Alex before, I wrote 4 different resignation letters over a period of about 2 years, because it was so frustrating for me knowing that the needs of the people that I represented were not getting heard and their needs were not getting met. And it's not fair, it's not right to the people. People deserve to elect a representative and know that that representative is going to represent their needs, whether it's in the legislature or parliament. And I fundamentally believe that is the way politics should be, and we should be working together to try to get back to that, I believe.
So, Bobbi and Elizabeth, you're both independents. You're arguably a caucus of one. In Ontario, there are other independents, but they're very different than you because they weren't elected as independents.
I'm glad you recognize that.
What's it like to be a caucus of one?
So there are challenges, but I would say that the benefits far outweigh the challenges. And the main challenge is that you don't have support staff to lean on, right? So I worked for a Conservative MPP for 23 years, and we did a lot of work, and COVID was a challenge for us as well. I'll get to that maybe later, but when my member went in the House, he was largely handed items from a minister's office, from the leader's office. There was no free thinking. There was no individual touch to what he was presenting in the legislature. So as an independent, I can genuinely go to Queen's Park and, I don't have party overlords. I don't have anyone telling me what I can and cannot say, what I can vote for. The people of Haldimand-Norfolk tell me or guide me in how I conduct myself at Queen's Park, and it's very freeing. As somebody who was in the party system for over 23 years, was the local PC Association president for 20, attended all conventions, worked nominations and by-elections. It's very freeing. It's a good feeling. And some reporters ask me, are you lonely? And I understand the context of the question, but I am not lonely. I have an army of people back in Haldimand-Norfolk who support this way, and it was alluded to at the beginning that we are a bit different in Haldimand-Norfolk, and we're different in a good way because they saw this as they saw what happened in Haldimand-Norfolk as a slap in the face of democracy, and they rose to the occasion. They went to the ballot box and they did something they were told never to do. So yes, we are different, and I like to represent them in a very different way. I'm not your typical politician, and I think one of the things that we've missed in some of the questions so far is, the party takes away your ability to be an individual, to be unique, to be dynamic, to be interesting. They want you as boring as possible, and I don't believe I'm boring, and my constituents don't think I'm boring either, and that's a good thing. I would say that as an independent, I think that's the thing that I love the most, is that my creativity and my personality isn't stifled by a brand.
Love it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel being an independent?
I love being an independent as well, and I think when you're an independent, your team are your people. Your team are the people that you represent. In my case, it's Cumberland North. The people of Cumberland North are my team. There's no conflict anymore about which team I'm with. Because before, if you're with the party, you're expected to be part of that team, and too often that team is not representing the people that elected you. So I have a lot less conflict in my life, and I'm able to go to the legislature and put forth bills and legislation and ask the questions in question period that actually matter to the people that I represent. And since becoming an independent in 2021, I've tabled 54 bills, and some of those bills the work has gotten done, that those bills presented, and probably about 2/3 of them are on healthcare, because that's my main focus, but a lot of them are also on affordability and finance issues and tax issues that are important to not only Cumberland North, but in many cases all Nova Scotians. And the reality is, a lot of the other MLAs have taken me aside privately and said, we envy you. We wish we could be independent like you, and I'm like, you can.
That's exactly what I say to them. You can.
Yes. Like, don't let anyone convince you that it's a weakness. It's actually very empowering, and for the people that you represent and for democracy.
Scott,
That-
you were
That was
with-
really good, by the way.
That's
That
good,
was
wasn't
really
it?
good. I mean, that's essentially at the core of what they do. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
You
well,
ask
I mean, you were with a political party, with a brand for a
Oh, yeah.
long period of time over more than one leader. How do you react to that about your ability to be your true self as a partisan?
Oh, it's maddening. The one thing that you talked earlier about, I tell you, the benefits of the party. The benefits of being independent is, when a microphone comes, I'm like, let's go. Now, I got to that point later on because I had no greater ambitions to be in cabinet. I didn't want to do any of that stuff. I just wanted to represent my riding, do my thing. I was able to get a few things, like I was appointed to committees that allowed me to do some travel in Europe and do that stuff. I wouldn't have gotten that as an independent. That stuff is there. But at the core of the functioning of democracy, I mean, here's the problem. The people who come up to politicians, because they've come up to me too, and I wish I was more independent like you. A good friend of mine, Nate Erskine Smith, same sort of thing. Now he's very partisan, very liberal, but he also has his own thing when he talks about certain bills. But in order for this to happen, Elizabeth just said it perfectly, which is you can do this too, right? Because here's what happens. Leaders will always say, I want to promise that I will give backbenchers more power. Garbage. They can't, and they want to and they can't, and they say it, and it's just whenever, I don't care who the leader is. I mean, even I've argued with Elizabeth May about this, which is, no, you can't do that, and you don't sincerely mean it. In order for backbenchers to have the power or the be in a spot similar to what Elizabeth talked about, you have to take it yourself. If you have to face whatever punishment is there, you have to face ostracization, because you can be ostracized by your colleagues. So what? Nobody in caucus can vote for you. Nobody.
That's right.
That everyone seems to forget that. Let's go beyond ambitions. I always say that the people who don't serve the conversation well when it comes to a strengthening a party, and people who should be on the receiving end of a caucus meeting should be cabinet members and those who want to join it, quite frankly, to use a phrase. Because these people have set ambitions to go there. And I've got nothing against deep partisans. A good example, Pierre Poilievre. He got elected in 2004 when I did. I have never met a more deep-seated partisan individual. But he won't tell you any different. He won't pretend to be someone who's independent of the party. That's his game. That's what he wants to do. I have a lot of respect for Pierre. I've known him for years. I'll even say I'm his favorite liberal. It's not on my LinkedIn page, don't worry. But people say to me, what's Pierre Poilievre like? If you know hockey, Pierre Poilievre is like the Brad Marchand of Canadian politics. The only people that really like him are on his team.
Right.
If you're not on his team, look out. He's a steamroller. He'll take you out. And but that's what he does. And people would say he's a great team player, he's a great team player. Of course he is. Look where he is now. That's how he got there. It depends what you want to do. If a backbencher wants to be a backbencher, be one. Stop going up to people and saying, I wish I was you. No, wish you yourself. If that makes sense.
I know during COVID, there were at least 14 MPPs who were very upset with what was going on in Ontario, but none of them they didn't band together. So they allowed a few folks to kind of take the hit, and if they would have banded together and stood up and said, we are questioning this, we want answers, it would have been much more effective. Right. And I don't know what they were protecting. I mean, the base salary of an Ontario MPP is $116,500. Is that what you're protecting? I don't understand it.
Yeah. Can I share a little story? So just one of the things you said, it made me think of. So when you're actually in the legislature or parliament, as human beings, we all want to be liked. We all want to be included. But I think sometimes when you're there, you can easily forget why you're there and get sucked into feeling like you need to do what this person wants or the person beside you, and remembering you're actually there to represent the people back home. And if you always keep reminding yourself of that, you're going to always make the right decisions. And the Premier called an emergency session last summer to deal with a potential raise that he didn't want for the MLAs. So called an emergency session. We were there on the second day. The House Leader for the government came to me and the other House leaders in opposition and said, so we want to put this bill through without going to committee of the whole and third reading. We just want to do it all in a day, but we need unanimous consent. Yeah. And the two other opposition party House leaders said yes. And I said, you know, there is something you could do for me. I said, the emergency room expansion at our regional hospital is, I'm a little worried because it was announced by the previous Premier. And I said, I would just like to have it in writing from the government that this is not going to be delayed. And so the House Leader said, sure. And then came back to me an hour later and said, so the Minister of Health has assured me that everything is on track. And I said, great, can you just give it to me in writing? So, no, we can't do that. So I said, okay, I can't give you unanimous consent. Like, what if it's true, there's no reason why you can't give me that in writing. And it's something that means a lot to the area. Our hospital needs an expansion. And it came down to the vote, and out of 55 people, I said no, and they were furious with me because it meant we had to come back after a long weekend. But I said, listen, I'm not here to make you all happy. I like you, but I'm here to represent the people from Cumberland North, and all I asked for was something confirming. And the day after we left, they actually did a press release saying the Emerge expansion is on track and on time. So I actually got what I wanted.
Good for you.
Because they wanted to make sure that everybody knew that it was on track. But I just make that point because it's so easy to forget what team we're on and why we're there. And with true democratic representation, we always have to be reminding ourselves why we're there, and that is to represent the people that brought us there, right? Yeah.
I think when I went to Queen's Park, the Liberals and the NDP were watching me closely because they believed that I would be a puppet for Doug Ford. I was a Conservative staffer for 23 years, and that's what they expected. So when I, came to question period the first time and asked a really hard-hitting question, they were all, and so I think that helped earn that respect. So there's times where I'll stand up and I'll vote with the Conservatives, and the Liberals beside me kind of, heckle me a little bit in a fun way, yeah. And but. I think there's that mutual respect that, yes, she is there, and we wish we could do that too. Nobody's angry with me when I vote one way or another. Even the Conservatives, when they just kind of hang their head and, oh, shucks. But, nobody, I don't think anybody is really keeping track except for maybe the Leader's office. Right?
Scott, when were you able to get things done for your constituents as a backbencher in a political party?
I'm still working on it. I'm kidding. There's a lot of things you could, like. Sometimes we forget that there's a micro side of this job as opposed to the macro issues that is very fulfilling. I once saved the separation of a family. He met his wife in the United States. She's Mexican nationality. Things happen with immigration. It was bad. She had a child in Canada. Her and her oldest son were being deported out of Canada to Mexico while her husband and youngest child had to remain. So we actually worked on to the point where we actually were able to get the minister's office to do something to keep them united. That's the type of thing that never makes the news, but it's pretty fulfilling stuff, right? I mean, you guys know what I'm talking about. And anyone's had that experience. You don't have to be at a municipal level to be that granular in what you do. You can be at the highest level and do the granular things. Because what the Westminster system delivers is a prime minister and a cabinet, but they're members of parliament too, which is why I'd be a little skeptical if I was to vote on a leader or to be prime minister or a premier if they haven't had that grounding in the beginning, because then but I think the greater accomplishments on a larger scale takes time. government in Canada is a big machine, not just federal, but the government of Ontario. It takes a lot. If you can move, as someone once said to me, if you can move the government, just twitch it a bit. It's a big deal, and it takes a while. Which is not a bad thing, because that's why we're one of the best countries on earth, is because you just can't get in and just wipe everything out. I mean, you see the rhetoric that's happening in the United States right now with, I won't even say his name, Voldemort. But he's in a position now where he's starting to talk about doing some fundamental core changes to governance. Well, you know, that doesn't take long, but it's awfully dangerous. So I think you have to be patient. I've been in a situation where I compelled the government to spend upwards of $50 million to do environmental cleanup in a harbor in my riding. It was a big deal. It took a lot of convincing, and it took a lot of research, not just from your own party. I'll never forget, I was calling, just a quick story. We had this oil spill in my riding, and I called the minister's office. Now, every minister has staff that work from a political side of things and a bureaucratic side of things, so you know, but you guys know too. When I called the staff and said, you know, I got this oil spill, I need to talk to someone, what's going on? Oh, well, we'll give you the lines to use. What? Lines? Like, what am I, like, as a government, we're hoping that it'll be cleaned up, and, you know, and hopefully the middle class will persevere. Like, what kind of lines are you going to give me? I just want information. These people want to know who's coming to clean it up and do that sort of thing. But I couldn't get that, right? So there you have an exquisite example of being a messenger. And if you go into it being a messenger, I find that people who are very partisan and take that type of attitude, I've met these people when they weren't in politics anymore. And they're angry about a lot of things. And they're angry because they allowed that to happen. So by exercising your own little bit of power you have, you can do great things. You just got to do your research, and you got to be patient. And that would be the same for independence. Like, how many bills you say?
54.
It takes a lot of work.
It's a lot.
Like 54 bills. I mean, there's 54 laws. Right? You know, but it's research, patience.
And just following up on that, I've had a member say to me, part of the government say, you know, well, it's not my fault. It's not the government's fault. It's the bureaucracy's fault. Well, whose fault is it really then, right? It's up to you. It's up to you to lean on the bureaucracy and say, no, we're doing it this way. So, you know, that messenger, they rely on that too much. They become very dependent on just saying, hey, it's not my fault. It's the bureaucracy or it's the leader's office, and constituents don't want to hear that.
Just briefly, because that's an excellent point, because you realize in the Westminster system that we have, it's a high-level exercise in hypocrisy. Because, yes, we can do this. Yes, this project can be done. Yes, this will be the last first past the post, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden it's not, right? Well, you know, the bureaucracy, that's where that comes in. It's because now you have to reverse something you either wanted to do and cannot do, which is the more honest answer, which is we can't do this, right? It's like when John Chrétien couldn't eliminate the GST. Folks, the revenue hole is too big. At least I give him some credit for that. But when you pretend that you kind of done it or done something else, this is what's happening now, is that people, staff and leadership, communication roles, are in a position where they're trying to get people to move on. And this is the kind of language they use to move on, which is, well, it's not really feasible. The bureaucracy tells me. And it goes back to your point. It's like, well, it didn't seem to be a problem before. Yeah.
I've got two more questions before maybe we'll turn it over. Okay. I've got a trigger warning, and the trigger warning is we're going to talk about the dark side of party politics. And so it's come up about how sometimes, you know, it can be really hard being on the outside of a team, on the outside of a brand or a machine. You know, can you maybe just help us understand how hard it can be sometimes to be on the outside of a political party or on the outside of the leadership or people who are not on your side anymore?
First,
Sure.
well, okay. I mean, I'm living it sort of very actively right now. Unfortunately, even though I was elected as an independent, since becoming even an independent, the current leader that was leader of my former party has sort of led some intimidation and harassment tactics in the legislature and outside of the legislature. About a year ago, some of you may have seen in the news, we had a really sad case in our hospital. A young 33-year-old mother died while waiting for care, and her name was Allison Holthoff. And her husband, it happened on New Year's Eve, and her husband came to my office and said, I need your help. My wife died. I want an investigation. So we immediately contacted the Minister of Health's office on his behalf and was told no. So, which isn't typical. Like usually my office is able to get response and answers, but it didn't take long, within a couple of days in the community, that everyone was in outward, because this woman that passed away was loved by everyone. The husband actually went to the media, and the community started putting a lot of pressure on me to say, you need to help this family. So I talked to the husband, and I actually posted online on social media the letter that I had sent to the minister asking for help. And that night, I got an email from the Department of Justice at about 20 to midnight threatening to sue me if I didn't remove this letter. So that's just one thing, but as recent as April, one of the cabinet ministers actually put forth a notice of motion to have me removed completely as an MLA from the Nova Scotia legislature. So it's continuing, and I had tabled a bill. It's a controversial bill for them, but it was a bill to ban NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, in cases of sexual assault, specifically within political parties. And their response was to try and remove me. There was some backlash in the public, so they never did call the notice of motion for a vote to remove me. However, they've also chosen not to remove the notice of motion, so it continues to this day to sit on the order paper in the government. So when we go back to the legislature, they could call it any day and vote to remove me. So I've decided to challenge it in court, so it is before the courts right now. So how do I cope though with it is that fundamentally I believe that it's really very important to me that whatever I do is based on truth and justice and what is right. And at the end of the day, I have to look at myself in the mirror. My personal story is I lost my mom. She was only 28. She died of melanoma. I was 5. So I grew up always knowing life is short. Life is a gift, and we never know, when our days will be the last. And I believe that the life that I have on this earth, I want it to matter, and I want to make sure that I have no regrets. So I believe I'm on the right side of this issue. I fundamentally do not believe non-disclosure agreements should be allowed in cases of sexual assault, and I know firsthand of victims that have been silenced and perpetrators that have gone on to continue to abuse people. So I know I'm on the right side of this issue, and instead of supporting this bill, they chose to put forth a motion to have me removed, and we'll see what the courts say. So anyway, I'm just going to continue to do what I believe is right, and I'm okay with being in conflict in the legislature because I think I'm on the right side of this.
Get done because they're annoying, right? But this is an individual streak of that person. Like, here's a good example, and I'm sure you've heard this. This is one that really annoys me. When they come to the door, they say, I'm with the PC party, in your case, or PC in Nova Scotia, Liberal Newfoundland. Vote for me because I will be on the side of government. I will be in a government seat. The next time someone says that, a candidate says, I'll be on the side of government, fine. Here's the deal. If you win the seat and your party is in opposition, you're going to sign a piece of paper right now saying you'll quit because you just said you'll be useless. Backbench MPs in the opposition and independents are useless. So you make a solemn agreement with everybody that you will quit if you're in opposition. See what they say then. Sorry, I know that sounds a bit angry. I don't mean to be angry about it, but it just bothers me because I don't mind being people partisan. I gave the Pierre Poilievre example. But don't come, if you're going to be the messenger of a party and you have all kinds of ambition to become a cabinet minister or a leader of a party, that's fine, that's great, but don't come to my door and say, I'm representing you. Don't think so. I really don't get it. This is the part of party politics that they got to stop doing.
So on that positive and optimistic note, we'll turn it over.
Sorry.
Yes, well, this is good and bad that we've arrived at this moment. Good because I could see that we have received an open-hearted, open-minded delivery of your experience, and that is so important, and that's the reason why this session was so important, to show all of the factors operating in real-life terms that militate against the independence that we all think representatives should have. And representatives tell Samara Center of Democracy endlessly about their disappointments, the piles of data of complaints, and I couldn't do this and I couldn't do that and so on. And so it's sort of ending on a promising note as unfinished business. And it may very well be that the Churchill Society will decide that there has to be a reprise, and we'll come back and we'll talk about radical ideas. I'm a labor lawyer, and I keep thinking that backbenchers probably need a union because the party is the big bad boss, and of course there's fear and dealing one at a time as opposed to the power of the collective. So that's my radical thought in reaction to this. I could take a question or two, but we're running out of time. So would one of you wonderful OLIPs who have come to listen to all of this radical stuff, would you have a question that you'd like to have recorded and posted? Yes.
Sure, yeah. Just touching on something that you said, Bobbi, about going back to your constituents, voting on behalf of your constituents. I was just wondering, how do you do that, like actively? Do you have specific people that you go to kind of sound legislation off of, or which way you're going to vote like that?
I think I do a lot of work through social media, and I'm also on the ground a lot. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about earlier was return on investment. We are in a supermajority position here in Ontario. It is not a good return on investment for the electorate of Haldimand-Norfolk for me to sit and be a warm body in a seat just for the sake of it. So when I'm not needed at Queen's Park, I'm in the riding, I'm in coffee shops, I am everywhere. And that really allows you to hear from a whole bunch of folks. I have two counties, two very large counties, and I make sure I spend equal time in both. And they tell me how they feel. They tell me on social media. And so it's that general feel. There's emails that come in, calls that come in. So it's just listening to people. And I think that sometimes politicians forget that people just want to be heard. So hear them. And that's how I'm guided at Queen's Park.
Can I just add quickly to that? That's an excellent point, because remember the question about staff? Nothing specific against staff, don't get me wrong, but a lot of staff in positions of power, what do they do on weekends? They continue to talk about politics with friends, right? The people they work for, they're at the seniors' dinner, they're at the firefighters' ball. This is where you get your basic information to run on. This is where your fuel comes from, right? Because if you have a town hall, chances are the majority of people there know what they're voting for or where they're leaning. They're just there because this is what they like to be involved. But when you go to these general events, you get a good feel. Data people can't really pick up on that one because, it's just none of your business.
And I'd say when I started, over just more than 23 years ago now, the leader's office would call the constituents, the constituency office. They would call, if they knew I was the riding association president, they'd call and they'd say, hey, Bobbi, and what do you know? We're going to this area. We know that you share some of these things. What do you know? And I said to my former boss, Toby Barrett, years ago, I said, those calls dried up. They no longer care about what we know in the riding. They believe that they know what's happening on our ground when they're sitting in a tower downtown Toronto.
that
For the
too.
two of you, when you're campaigning, you're door knocking and things like that, I've found that a lot of people can be very heavily associated with a party. So how do you appeal to those people? How do you appeal to people that are like, I always vote PC, I always vote Liberal, I don't want to hear what you have to say, you're not going to win, or whatever those feelings are. How did you appeal to people and say, like, I'm different, I can advocate for you even if I'm an independent?
Well, I can say for most people, I know a lot of people. So most people, when I'm door knocking, they already know me.
Mm-hmm.
So especially the second time around as an independent, because it was so public what happened to me. So it would be rare for me to go somewhere people didn't already know who I was. But even before when I ran the first time in 2017, I grew up in the area, and so and I had 4 businesses, and I've got 4 children, and so when you think about all of, and I have 9 brothers and sisters, so there's connections in rural Canada, like you're always connected with. And if I went into a coffee shop and didn't know somebody, like there was once I went into a McDonald's, and there was a group of 6 older men, and they were clearly like giving me a little bit of a like snub. So I just said, "Do you know my dad?" And they said, "Who's your dad?" And I said, "Leon Smith." And they're like, "Leon's your father."
They won
And then
him
all
over
of a
right
sudden,
there.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. So I think it helps if you're in your community and people know you, then that helps to build, because politics is all about relationships and people trusting you that you're going to work for them. Would you say?
It's all local, and my story is much the same. 23-year career working for the local MPP, people had gotten to know me, and they knew that if they couldn't reach Toby, they could reach me, and I could help them probably just as well, right? And so, and those small town connections, they're real, they exist. We know that, and if I went to a door, especially in some new parts of where there were some folks who would come in, just move to the area, I would say to them, do you know about this issue? And that issue was, in particular, a proposed subdivision of 40,000 in and around our industrial park. And nobody, except for the PC candidate who had proposed the idea, thought it was a good idea, the premier. So, you just talked about that. You talked about 23 years of experience, and it didn't matter which party. I had local Liberals who had raised money for the Liberal Party, who had worked campaigns for the Liberals, going, no, Doug Ford, you're not going to do that to our local girl. And I think it goes back to the beginning when when it was said that people in Haldimand-Norfolk were a bit different, and in a good way. So, yeah.
I have the opposite story. People will look at me and say, "Scott, love you dearly, but..."
Can't do it.
Listen, I ran as a rural Liberal under Justin Trudeau. I was threatened with physical violence 3 times. Chargeable stuff. I didn't call the police, but I could very well have. And I didn't say anything. I just stepped on their property. I think now it's harder to be an independent-minded person in a party. I think in the future, thankfully, it should be easier to do what they're doing, which I think I ran too early. This is my thing. If I had to do it all again, I probably would run as an independent, only because I can't sit around and wait for the backbench to... The party machinery is becoming larger now, and the party machinery, like, there are people getting serious rewards inside caucus, not for caucus work, not for parliamentary work, but party work. In order to be a Liberal candidate to get my nomination, you'd think I'd have to... If you're a good MP, you get the nomination. No. You have to go... you have to get so many members signed up to give you $20 a month. You have to get so many members signed up for this. You have to raise X amount of dollars, right? Yeah, that's got to be in your bank account, which is, they say, well, that's good for you. Yeah, but I have to sign a deal that they get 60% of my rebate. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, seriously? It's easier, like I said, for someone like a Nate Smith or myself or others, it's going to be harder for them to do. Well, Nate is actually quite a party person. I wasn't, but it's difficult. And I don't know if it's going to be any easier for independents, like the two wonderful people sitting here. I hope it's easier, but we'll see.
I would love to just share a little story. Something you said earlier about when somebody goes to the door and says, I'm going to be with government so I can. On either side of me are two PC MLAs, so they're with government. One's even a cabinet minister.
Yep.
And they both have rural, it's Parishboro and Tattagouche, they have rural emergency departments. And I have a rural emergency department in Pugwash. The government changed theirs to an urgent care center, took away 24/7 emerge, and it's a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, basically doctor's office. And when they went to do it in mine, I publicly stood up and said, what does the community want? Does the community want this? We held a public meeting, 350 people came and said, absolutely do not do this. Guess whose emerge is still open 24/7? The independents, not the government MLAs.
Right.
They're both changed, and they were not allowed to say anything. Like, nothing was said publicly. Anyway, it's just an example of, I think as an independent, you can be very effective in representing your people and get results.
Well, we have a bridge in the town of Caledonia that's over 125 years old, and it has been deemed, it's going to collapse. It's going to collapse. And the former MPP couldn't talk about it. My former boss, he couldn't stand up and question this. I've questioned it 4 times in the legislature since election day, and I will continue to question until that bridge is reconstructed. And the granular issues, perhaps government would look at that as a granular issue. And back in the day when I first started working for Toby, every Thursday when we were in government was considered Constit Day in the House. You could stand up and ask questions related to your riding. That's gone. That's long gone. You can no longer ask those questions. Now they're just lob ball questions.
Yeah. That's something that I'm looking to you as the academic should be more about, which is we in Canada is different from the UK, even though we have the same system essentially. That the order of speakers, who gets to speak, is still determined by caucus, by the whip. It's wrong. It should be the Speaker of the House. They call them member statements.
Yeah.
Well, I used to heckle the Conservatives when they get up and talk about how wonderful Harper was, and when they'd sit down, I'd always yell at them and say, my name is Stephen Harper, and I approve this ad.
Yeah.
That's after their 1-minute statement. You might as well call it like it is. And it's horrible because a member statement is for who? I think it's in the title, isn't it? For the member? Like, silly me. So the Speaker of the House needs to be more assertive. Not just, you be quiet, you be quiet. They have to take over the procedure part, which they're losing. And since we're in the Churchill Society talking about this, I don't know why they haven't done it yet, because nobody speaks up. They're afraid to speak up about it. It's too bad. I'm not sure about provincial. I always thought that provincial legislatures need to beef up their committee systems. That would give you guys some more say.
Well, committee I thought was the place where I actually could
I'm thinking about Newfoundland. Ontario's probably better.
affect the most change. But I traveled the province last year at this time doing pre-budget consultations on the finance committee, and I was very afraid that it was all preconceived, and it was. When the budget came out, very little of what we heard on the road in Kenora, Peterborough, Ottawa, Kingston was in that budget. And another good example, I now sit on social policy, and just before Christmas we were doing amendments to the Convenient Care at Home Act, and not one amendment was adopted. So we sit there and we go through hours and hours of public consultation. For what?
So you have worse than no committee. You have
It's
phony
show
committee.
and sham.
Show and sham.
It's window dressing, whatever you want to call it. It's not a good return on investment to have politicians sitting there who are supposed to be policymakers.
Yeah.
We're not policymakers. It goes back to the whole, it's about messaging.
Partisan.
Yeah.
So, my name is Drew. I work for both the Ontario Liberals, and I'm now working as a staffer at Toronto City Hall.
Good.
So, part of my job is to whip the vote, but it's independence. There is no party system at City Hall,
Yeah.
as much as maybe the mayor would want it another way.
Yeah.
And But that makes my life very difficult to actually get votes because I'm suddenly having to deal, and I'm only in charge of I'm the director of TDC policy, transit policy for the city of Toronto. And it's incredibly hard to get those cats to go and vote on a motion. One of them is wanting to run off in that direction. I'm trying to get a city council to go who wants to go in that direction. And when you get to something as big as the Ontario legislature, I kind of wonder how would one make it actually function. And I look at the U.S. where they have a very weak party system, which results in nearly shutdowns every time a budget comes up because someone wants this in their pork barrel project.
Yeah, that's
they
true.
want, and I was kind of wondering what you guys thought about that. And I want to ask one question to Bobbi because you are the actually I've got two more questions. One is that to the professor, how many independents have been won who are not like Bobbi and sorry, your name? Elizabeth, who have been previous party members. Because it seems to me that what's unique about the two of you is that you were both long stays in your party. And then for a variety of reasons, you left that party, and then you were able to leverage those connections that you had built over 20 years, etc., into political careers, as compared to someone who was independent from day one and then tried to get elected. And the third thing is, for Bobbi Ann, right now the government's in the supermajority. But now the tides are changing in Ontario. I say that as Ontario Liberal, where there's a chance with Bonnie Crombie being a stronger challenger to the government. And I was wondering how you felt pressure on your seat, given that I would imagine from a conservative strategist, we're going to circle that riding as a winnable riding, or potentially winnable riding in 2026, because we may be losing seats in places like Mississauga, etc. And that's where that war chest is sort of deployed. I was kind of wondering how you thought about that in your own 2.5 years.
So I don't worry about that. I mean, if that's the beauty that I have, and this was an argument with some of those folks that I said really disappointed me and I feel betrayed by them, is when I first went to Queen's Park, I would get calls from them saying, why are you asking hard questions? Well, it's my job to ask hard questions. Well, you're never going to be part of the fold. It's not what I'm there for. If I never become part of the fold, if it means that I'm defeated in 2026 because I went to Queen's Park in a very genuine way and I represented the people of Haldimand-Norfolk to the very best of my ability, then so be it. I don't need to be a career politician. I don't need to protect what I'm doing. And I believe that they will have a harder fight on their hand in 2026, and they can put all the money they want into Haldimand-Norfolk. I believe that the people of Haldimand-Norfolk know that I'm doing the very best that I can for them, and I'm asking questions that they have wanted asked for a long, long time.
So they'll send when she finally gets what she wants, they'll send in a minister who can't even spell Haldimand-Norfolk to announce this money that I'm giving you. That's
I have been driven to desperate measures.
Oh, well, it's going to be you.
So if you don't stop.
Stop talking.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
The wonderful Haldimand-Norfolk constabulary to force you out of this room.
That's a serious badge, too.
Corinne,
That is amazing.
You gotta let me respond one thing to you. Can I?
Go ahead.
I just have to say one thing. So your thing about the whip and how do you get cats to, so fundamentally, that should never happen. Because every person that's voting should be voting based on what the people they represent want. It shouldn't be anything what you're doing, right? Right? That's what we're talking about here tonight, is democracy. And so I just had to add that comment because I don't, and I'm not saying that to diminish your work, but really, every person that you're talking to, even at a municipal level, should still be voting based on the people, what people they represent want.
And I'm going to have the last word because we have to finish. And to answer your question, I'm aware of two. There was an MP in Quebec who was a talk radio host, and he got elected around 2008, 2006. And there was a woman, was it? Okay. And then out in BC, there was a woman who got elected provincially. Those are the two I'm aware of who got elected for the first time.
Where'd Chuck Cadman?
No, he was a conservative.
Oh, right.
Yes, well, I have to interject with great regret, and you've given us plenty of material that would be in line with Edmund Burke's admonitions to us that every institution of governance must periodically undergo correction in order to conserve the very principles upon which it was founded. So you have provided wonderful information to make us think of correction and the solutions similar to what we never got to Scott Sims about how to invigorate the backbenchers. But I do think that it's been a wonderful contribution to the public discourse with little known information that's not is suspected but not known. So thank you for your candor, thank you for your time and traveling all the distance that you have come. But sadly, we have to conclude maybe this segment of our conversation.